Good afternoon. My name is Jeannine, and I'm a Business Development Manager for Finance of America. Today, I'm here at El Encanto in Santa Barbara, and I have a special treat for you. I am here with the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. He's a trainer, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, and has touched millions of lives all around the world. Jack Canfield, welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Jack, we're constantly on a quest for success.
Mm-hmm.
I saw an interview of yours where you defined success as fulfilling the soul's purpose.
Yes.
How can we tap into our greatness and fulfill our soul's purpose?
Well, first of all, let me just speak to the definition of success, because I used to believe that success was achieving any result you wanted. You want to make $1 million, you did that, you were a success. You want to be a famous poet, you did that, you were a success. But I've worked with thousands and thousands, probably millions of people live around the world in 51 countries, and I've discovered a lot of people have what we normally would call the symbols of success. They have the cars, the house, the mansion, the bank accounts, the boats, the planes, and they weren't really fulfilled, they weren't really happy. And so I began to look at my own life and why was I so happy? And I realized that we each have a unique life purpose. We each have something we're here to either express or to learn or to contribute into the world. And when we don't do that, we end up feeling frustrated, we don't feel fulfilled. We have all the toys, but we don't have the inner fulfillment. And so I believe that each of us has the capacity to tap into and discover. The word discover means to take the cover off of something already there, which is the essence of who you are. Some people are very lucky when they're younger. They know, I want to be a baseball player. I want to be a musician. I want to play violin. I'm remembering this mother who told me recently her son was just played the violin all the time. And he said, you have to stop playing the violin. Go outside and play. And so she looks out 20 minutes later, and there's this other girl from down the street, and they're playing the violin and cello together, because this is what his purpose was. It was music. So I think that each of us has the capacity to tap into that. We can talk about how if you want, so that we have the sense. Someone once said, there's two great days in your life. The first is when you're born, and the second is when you figure out why. You know, you figure out what your why is, what is your motivation, what's propelling you forward, what's your passion. And as we were talking before we started the interview, so many people are living like zombies. They've never really discovered their passion, or when they were passionate as a child, they got squashed, either by parents, school, coaches, church, whatever it might have been, so that they're no longer allowing themselves to pursue that which brings them the greatest joy.
Correct. You said that we could tap into how do we discover our why? How do we find our why? I know that some people, like you said, at a young age know exactly what they want, and I'm always preparing my children or making sure that I bring out those talents, bring out those gifts so they can maximize them and utilize them. But how do we tap into our why?
Well, basically, I think the simplest way, well, I'll talk about 3 different ways that I use with my clients. Number one is just to do what I call a joy review. What has brought you the most joy in your life? When were you happiest? When did you feel most alive? There's a person recently said, I forget who it was, but it was a wonderful quote. He said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs are people who've come alive. Because when you're alive, you're doing that which you were designed to do. And my belief is that each of us is like a cell in a body. And if the kidney cells do what the kidney cells are supposed to do, and the eyeball cells do what the eyeball cells are supposed to do, and the heart cells do what the heart cells are supposed to do, then the body works. And if any one of those cells stops doing what it's supposed to do, or thinks it's the only cell that should exist and then starts multiplying, we call that cancer, then the body doesn't function correctly anymore. So the body of humanity needs each one of us pursuing that which brings us the greatest fulfillment. So the first thing for me, I look back on my life, I was always a teacher. You know, I was a Boy Scout leader, a patrol leader in the Boy Scouts. When I was, I would have been captain of the football team, but there's a reason I wasn't. I won't go into that. I would have been the president of my fraternity at Harvard, but I grew a beard, and they didn't want a guy with a beard to be representing SAE at the national convention. But I was always in these leadership positions, and I naturally loved to teach and to lead. And so here I am today, teaching. I taught high school, I taught college, and now I'm teaching, at a much larger level. So if you go and you look back over your life and say, when was I happiest? When was I most fulfilled? I write about a woman in my book, The Success Principles, named Julie Carrier, who went to Ohio State University, with the idea she'd become a veterinarian because she loved animals. She gets to Ohio State and she starts realizing that to become a veterinarian, I got to take biology and biochemistry and anatomy and all this. And she wasn't that interested in science. She just loved the kind of the petting of animals and nurturing them and being with them. And so she said, I'm miserable here. I'm not liking this. So she sat down, she said, when was I happiest? And she realized she was a student council president. She used to be, a mentor when the kids would come for conferences from high schools to Ohio State. She would be one of the people that would lead them around and help, oversee their leadership conferences. And she came to the conclusion, I love leadership. And she went to Ohio State University and she said, I want to get a degree in leadership. They said, we don't have one. And she said, well, can we create one? And they said, well, why don't you do an independent study, figure out what leaders need, and then come back and we'll talk about it. Well, persuasion, psychology, communication skills, and so forth. So she got the first degree in leadership from Ohio State. When I met her, she was 26 years old. She was teaching leadership at the Pentagon to military officers. So it's possible if you really get in touch with what turns you on and you follow that. Then you have to ask the question, how do I monetize that? There's a woman I know in Hawaii who loves to surf. Now, how do you make a living surfing? She actually teaches executives from companies, only women, to surf for a week. I think it's like $2,000 to $5,000 she charges. She gets like 5 to 10 women, and then they surf all day long. And she says, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you paddle too fast, the wave, you don't get the wave. If you wait too long, the wave goes by you. If you get up on your board too slow, you're not going to make it. If you get too far out in front of the board, you're going to tip over. Which if you get too far in front of your troops as a leader, you're going to tip over. If you miss the trends that are coming, like the waves, you're not going to be successful in business. And so she's making $10,000, $20,000 a week surfing. She's out on a beach in her bikini all week long. So the second thing you can do is a technique I teach in my book, The Success Principles, in the second chapter called Be Clear Why You're Here, which is about purpose and what we're talking about. And so you ask yourself, what are the two qualities that when I'm expressing them, I feel most like me? They're most who I am. So for me, it's love and joy. For my wife, it's authenticity and spontaneity. She just totally does whatever she wants, says whatever she wants, and people love her for it. For someone else, it might be organization and discipline. Then you ask yourself, what are the two ways you most love expressing those qualities? Well, for me, it was inspiring people, like with the Chicken Soup for the Soul stories, and empowering people with the tools I have in my books, The Success Principles, The Aladdin Factor, Dare to Win, things like that, and also in my seminars. And then the last question, or for me, so inspiring and empowering, and then the last question is, if you were to describe the world working perfectly according to you, what would be happening in that world? And so for me, it's everyone's living their highest vision, because as we talked about before, if every cell was doing its job, the world would work perfectly. And so then we turn that into one statement, combine it. My statement is inspiring and empowering people to live their highest vision in a context of love and joy. For my wife, it's giving people permission to be their authentic selves by being my authentic self, expressing my spontaneity and authenticity. Now, the third thing you can do is a guided visualization where I'll take people in. We'll go up a mountain, because whenever you go up in the guided visualization, you're going to a higher level of consciousness. And that's why gurus are always sitting on mountaintops in cartoons and so forth. And then I'll have them go into a golden temple, and then a guardian angel or a wise being comes down, gives them a box that has a gift in it. So my box, when I first did that exercise, I got a heart. So love, obviously, was that. And then I got a frog, love and joy. So it's a lot of fun. But then you can actually talk to the guardian angel or this wise being, and you can ask questions about what's my purpose, how should I be expressing that. We all have access to a higher level of consciousness, but most of us have never been taught how to access that. That's why meditation is so valuable. That's why guided visualization is so powerful, going to workshops and doing these kinds of exercises.
Thank you so much for that response. Okay, Jack, so we find our purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
And we pursue it. Well, let me say some people pursue it as yourself.
Sure.
And others give up. They're almost there, but right before they reach their purpose and
mm-hmm.
they feel fulfilled, they give up because of the excuses, because of outer circumstances. So what happened to me was I went to your event in Dallas in November, and I was very moved by your story. And when you told your story, I said to myself, here's someone who's extremely courageous. He has an insane amount of tenacity and resilience, because usually we give up right when we're about to achieve something
Sure.
great. So how have you managed to build that tenacity, and how have you managed to be rejected so many times with Chicken Soup of the Soul? With Chicken Soup for the Soul. How did you manage to keep going and just pressing forward?
Well, I was fortunate enough when I was in my 20s to have worked for a man named W. Clement Stone in Chicago, who was a self-made multimillionaire. And he did later get a college degree, but when he started his career, he'd never even graduated from college. And he was worth $600 million. And he started a company called Combined Insurance Company. He also was the original publisher of Success magazine. And so I was fortunate enough to work in his foundation. See, where I found my why was being a high school teacher. And I was teaching in an all-black inner-city high school, and I became much more interested in why my kids weren't motivated to learn than I was in teaching history, because I was always motivated. Why weren't they? And so I began to look around, how could I find ways to motivate other people? That's when I ran into W. Clement Stone, who'd written the book, The Success System That Never Fails. So at a very young age, I was exposed to one of the top minds in success in the world. And one of the things he said was, you never, ever, ever give up. You know, it's like, when do you give up? Never. You know, Winston Churchill is famous for a very short, I think the shortest speech in the history of education, where he delivered a graduate commencement speech to a private school. And he stood up and he said, "When should you give up? Never, never, never." And then he sat down. That was his whole speech. And so, you know, I was kind of imbued in that. And so what I've learned is that success in some way is a numbers game. You know, Brian Tracy teaches something called the law of probabilities. The more people you ask, the more likely you'll get a yes. The more things you try, the more likely one of them will work. And so for me, with Chicken Soup for the Soul, you know, we had a literary agent. We went to New York. We did 21 meetings in 3 days, you know, running around for the publisher. 21 rejections. They said the title's stupid. People don't read collections of short stories, which was true up until then. And so our agent gave us the book back and said, "I can't sell it." And someone said, "Well, you should go to this expo book expo in Anaheim." So we went down there and we got another 100 rejections. We went booth to booth to booth to all the publishers who were at this big expo. And eventually we found a publisher in Florida, but it was the 145th publisher that said yes. So we got 144 rejections. And most people give up after 5 or 10 or 12, or they say, "Nah, I'll never get a job." I was talking to an ex-convict recently who said, "You know, you can't get a job if you're an ex-con." I said, "Well, how many job applications do you put in?" 10. And every one of them said, "We just don't hire ex-convicts." Well, 10. Let me tell you about Chicken Soup for the Soul, you know. So you have to ask a lot of people. You know, it's the old, you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you meet the prince kind of thing. And so there's a wonderful book called Go for No. And the idea is, in sales, every no you get gets you closer to a yes. You know, so basically celebrate the no's. Set a goal to get no's. Today my goal is to get 10 no's. And every no you get, you feel empowered because you know you're getting closer to a yes. And in every given profession, whether it's mortgage brokerage, whether it's sales in the real estate, whether it's selling computers, multi-level marketing companies selling cosmetics, whatever it is, there's always a cycle that says for every 10 or every 25 or every 50 people I ask, I get a yes. In my business, it's like every 9 people we talk to on the phone, we get someone to enroll for one of our seminars. And I remember once in St. Louis, one of my staff had 81 no's in a row and was starting to get really depressed. And then the next day got 9 yeses in a row, keeping the average 1 out of 9. It's just sometimes they all come at the end. So if you know that and you understand that, then as you go forward, it's just a matter of like next, 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 until you get a yes.